Today's book review is two of my favorite book genres combined into one: history books and running books. This book is the Falmouth Road Race by Paul Clerici, and a quick synopsis of what the book is about from the book itself. The 7-mile Falmouth Road Race catapulted Cape Cod onto the running radar. Frank Shorter winning the gold in the 1972 Olympic Marathon inspired local barkeep Tommy Leonard to start a race in his own town. That inaugural race in 1973 garnered fewer than 100 runners. Participation soon swelled to the thousands, thanks to the success of organizers, volunteers, and talented fields, including running legends like Bill Rogers, Catherine Niboda, as well as wheelchair champions Bob Hall and Tatiana McFadden. Follow author Paul C. Clerici along every bend and uphill battle of the race's history, from the early stages of the running boom to resetting the road racing calendar. So that is the subject of today's book review, this book. And gotta say, like this book, great book. A couple background information to get us started. So this book was published first in 2015. Its full title is A History of the Falmouth Road Race, Running Cape Cod. It is by Paul Clerici. Paul is a freelance journalist. He's a writer, photographer, former newspaper editor for a bunch of publications in the Northeast. He is also the author of another book, another history book, which is the Boston Marathon History, which is on my list of books to read. It's on the bookshelf. It's pretty thick, so I think it's pretty comprehensive. And also a history of the Greater Boston Track Club. So Paul is a writer. He knows the sport. He knows how to write about history, and that's kind of what you get here. The way the book is organized, it is 130 pages, so not too long. It is organized into 7 chapters, and each chapter is a particular decade. So it goes from the inauguration of the race to the 1970s to the 1980s, and it follows each decade all the way up to the 2010s. And the very last chapter is called Offsprings and Offshoots, which is about races that started as a result of the Falmouth Road Race, and it's a pretty interesting stuff in that one as well. Where he gets his information from, the primary sources are honestly, a lot of it is just probably from the race results itself. So it's from the Falmouth Road Race archives. It's from the different souvenir programs. He gets a lot of them, just the who won the race, who competed in the race, that type of information there, the weather forecast as well. What's also interesting is that he does get primary sources from a lot of the runners themselves. So Bill Rogers, big runner in the 1970s, kept pretty good training logs, which other books have used as a primary source. He pulls some of that information in. He also has interviews with some of the key players. So he has interviews with Tommy Leonard, who in a lot of ways was the visionary founder of the race. He has the rare ability to get interviews with a lot of the race directors. There are originally 4 race directors. Paul himself is a race director, so he has that natural kinship, and he pulls upon these interviews with the race directors to get a lot of primary source information as well. And he also has other quotations from different runners, whether he talked to them directly or he pulled them from different newspaper clippings at the time. But those are the major sources that he uses to build together and create a history of this book. And what you get as you go through it is basically he covers each race at a time, going through the different decades. And every now and then there's some pretty cool pictures that get thrown in there, which breaks up the reading, makes it kind of neat to see some of these cool pictures. So to the review itself, there are things that I like and things that I would improve about the book. I think the first one is, as I mentioned, my 2 favorite genres of books in general are history books and running books. And this book brings both of these things together. And Falmouth is one of those iconic races. It has been going on now for 50 years. Living in Atlanta and having our local 10K race, which is the Peachtree Road Race, and having this race around the same time, it's sort of neat to see the histories of the two different races, which are iconic races. And what's great about this book is that you get a chance to see how this race started off literally as a very small race in a small vacation town in Cape Cod, Massachusetts, and how over the years and the perseverance of the race directors and the people, the inhabitants of the town, how they were dedicated to the race, it grew from being the small local race to being a world-renowned event. And so it's neat to read this book and slowly see how an idea can start small, but just over time it keeps building momentum until it creates something which is just an iconic race like this. The second thing I like about this book, and this is something I like about history books in general, is that there's a lot of micro stories throughout it. So as you're reading the chapter, a lot of what you get is, this was the race that happened in 1982, this is who's in it, this is who won, this is who gets second. Like, a lot of the chapters are that. But occasionally you get the micro story. And so you learn about the time that the hurricane came through Cape Cod. Or you learn about the time, a now famous time, where Alberto Salazar was racing and he suffered from pretty extreme heat stroke. And so you get not just the race recap, which is interesting, but you also get the extra detail that you get from reading a history book, that Paul is able to gather from the primary sources, from talking to the different race directors. You get that information, which adds a little bit more color and substance to the history. The final thing, which I think this book does well, is that a lot of times in books about running, especially running in the 70s and 80s when things were really popular in the US, it becomes very focused on just the men, right? It just becomes the story of the men's racing and the iconic men in the sport. But at the same time, there's a lot of other things going on, and female racing was just as popular with just as many big names. And you also had the emergence of wheelchair racing. And what this book does well is that it seamlessly integrates those three stories into the main storyline. And so a given race isn't just about, did Bill Rogers beat Frank Shorter? You also get the emergence of Joan Benet Samuelson, right? And understanding the different races that she had there. You get the introduction of the different wheelchair races and the different champions of the sport and how it emerged over the years and how times got quicker and quicker and quicker. And so you get all of that into the history from the beginning. It's not an afterthought. It becomes a part of the main storyline. And I think Paul did a really good job bringing those aspects into the sport as well. I think overall, the one thing that I would critique about this book, and it's hard to critique it because a lot of it's just a function of what's available in terms of sources for you to work with. But what you don't get is a lot of that detailed depth of development of the stories. I did mention you get the micro stories, and that's kind of all you really get. Some of my favorite books, such as the Bowerman Men by Kenny Moore, you get that much more in-depth description of the story. And so, for instance, you might read about how Bill Rogers finally won the Falmouth road race. And that is one or two sentences in the book. And they talk about how he broke away a certain mile point to beat Frank Short, and that's kind of it. But what you don't get is a lot more of the depth of, well, what did Bill do to get to that point? What was his training like the months ahead of time, the years ahead of time? What are the different things happening in his environment? And you don't get that because the way the book is designed, it is really a ability to capture 50 years of history to 130 pages. And so you just get kind of skipping along the top of the surface. You don't get any particular story and dive deep into that. That's why you have to read a bunch of other books to kind of get that more detailed story. And so my recommendation for something like this is that it's a great book to read and kind of get an overall view of what's happening with this particular race and how it happened over time. But if there is a particular thing that you're interested in, such as who is this Frank Shorter guy, or who is this Bill Rogers guy, or what is this Cape Cod Marathon, Then what you need to go do is go do a little bit more research on that, hopefully identify another book or an article and get more in depth, because you're not going to get any of that in this particular book. So overall, if you're a fan of road racing, you got to at least get this book or skim through this book. This is one of the iconic races in the sports, a race that I would love to go do someday. It's a unique distance, being 7 miles. It's been going on for now over 50 years, which makes it a very unique race in terms of its longevity and its history of champions. And so reading through it really connects you with the sport. And if you're a fan of running, it's great to read, to learn about the past champions, both the guys and the women that were running, as well as the sports writers and the newspaper editors, the people that are covering that, because there's a lot of people that work to combine to make this sport great over the last 50 years. So, great book. Check it out. Worth the read.